you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question.
We want to strengthen Medicaid. We want to strengthen Medicare.
So we're cutting $1.7 trillion in this bill, and you're not going to feel any of it. And your Medicaid is left alone. It's left the same.
You've promised not to cut Medicaid, said this is all just targeting waste, fraud, and abuse. Are you saying that the estimated 11.8 million people who could lose their health coverage, that is all waste, fraud, and abuse?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's going to be a very much smaller number than that, and that number will be waste, fraud, and abuse. And if you look, they took a much more liberal stance on the Medicaid situation than they could have.
After months of insisting that he's not going to touch Medicaid, Donald Trump finally admitted that he is indeed going to cut Medicaid. But don't you worry, because the number of people who'd lose health insurance won't be as high as you think, according to him. And specifically, he's just targeting waste, fraud, and abuse, wink, wink. So there's nothing to worry about. Listen, Trump's bullshit aside, the bill obviously does cut Medicaid. That's a fact. And every single Republican supporting it knows that it cuts Medicaid. And the consequences of said cuts to Medicaid will be utterly catastrophic. The CBO estimates that roughly 12 million Americans would lose health insurance if the big, beautiful bill became law. And more than 51,000 Americans would unnecessarily die each year, according to an analysis by Yale and the University of Pennsylvania. That includes 11,300 deaths from the loss of Medicaid or Affordable Care Act marketplace coverage due to 7.7 million people losing coverage, 18,200 deaths due to the loss of Medicaid coverage among 1.38 million low-income Medicare beneficiaries, causing loss of access to low-income prescription drug subsidies, and 13,000 deaths among Medicaid enrollees in nursing homes due to the rollback of CMS's 2024 nursing home minimum staffing rule. And as Jake Johnson of Common Dreams adds, the analysis also finds that the GOP's bill's failure to extend Affordable Care Act tax credits that are set to lapse at the end of the year would cause an additional 8,811 deaths per year, bringing the total to more than 51,300. And I don't want to just gloss over a number like that, so let me restate it. More than 51,000 Americans will die every single year if the big, beautiful bill passes. That is a lot of deaths that are completely unnecessary. Now, to put things into perspective, a pre-pandemic study from The Lancet found that 68,000 Americans already died every single year due to a lack of access to healthcare. So if the House approves the Senate's version and this goes to Trump's desk and he signs it into law, America's healthcare crisis will get significantly worse. And if you're one of the lucky Americans who manages to keep their health insurance throughout all of this, you very well may see an increase in costs, in addition to a decrease in access to healthcare, specifically if you live in more rural areas of the country, since hundreds of rural hospitals were already at risk of closing. But if they lose a substantial portion of patients due to Medicaid cuts, that could be the final nail in their coffins. For example, in Indiana alone, these 12 hospitals would be affected by the bill, and even Republican senators like Josh Hawley have sounded the alarm about the threat that the bill poses to rural hospitals. Now, did individuals like Josh Hawley end up voting for the bill in the end anyway? Well, of course they did, because Republicans care more about their own careers than your lives. And to give you a better sense of how disastrous this will be, this interactive map from the Kaiser Family Foundation estimates how many people per state is going to lose their health insurance due to the combined cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. In Oregon, which is my state, 5% of us will lose health insurance. That's 220,000 people. In California, 4% would lose health insurance. That's 1.8 million people. In Texas, 6% would lose health insurance. That's 1.9 million people. In Florida, 9%, nearly 1 in 10 people would lose health insurance. That's 2.3 million people. In Louisiana, 6% of the population would lose insurance, amounting to 280,000 people. So unless there are substantial changes to the House version of this bill, Trump seems poised to sign a bill into law that will literally kill tens of thousands of Americans every single year, specifically so he can help finance additional tax cuts for himself and his rich friends. They are literally trying to kill us so the rich can get richer. We're talking about violent class warfare being waged on the overwhelming majority of the American population. It'll be a complete and utter disaster, and every one of them know that, including Republicans like Lisa Murkowski, who, despite voting for it after getting pork for Alaska, low-key admitted that she hopes it fails in the House.
And listen to this quote from Senator Murkowski, who just caved and voted for this bill. And you got to love this. She said, quote,
My hope is that the House is going to look at this and recognize that we're not there yet, end quote. I mean, my question to her is, if you really believe that, then why the hell did you vote for this bill? It doesn't make any sense.
I can answer that question. She voted for it for the same reason that Josh Hawley voted for it after he said he wouldn't, because they are terrified of Donald Trump. Josh Hawley looked reporters in the eye and said, we can't do this. If Republicans are supposed to be the party of the working class, they weren't and never were, but if that's who they're supposed to be, then we can't cut Medicaid while giving tax cuts to the rich. But yet he did just that. See, opposing this bill could end their careers. So when given the choice between their careers and the lives of American citizens, they voted to sacrifice Americans, thousands of Americans, to the gods of capitalism to save their own asses. It is so cowardly because they can find new jobs, but we won't be able to replace the people who died due to their votes. So these people are scum and they should absolutely lose their jobs. And in case you were wondering, there were only 3 Republicans in the Senate who voted against this: Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Tom Tillis. J.D. Vance ended up casting the tie-breaking vote. But Rand Paul, as a doctor, he really couldn't care less about the Medicaid cuts. His main concern was that it would explode the deficit. Okay, at least you voted against it, but my concern is people who would die because of this. Susan Collins, who is deeply unpopular in a blue state, she's a Republican up for re-election next year, so I think that she probably wanted to have at least one thing she can say she opposed Trump on to save her ass. As for Tom Tillis, his vote against this destroyed his career because after he announced his opposition to the bill, Trump threatened to primary him, and he subsequently announced that he's not going to seek re-election. But now that he's on his way out, he's finally able to tell the truth after lying for years. And of course, he's confirming what we're already saying about the big, beautiful bill, that would be a disaster of epic proportions and a betrayal of the American people.
What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years, when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys? Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made.
And he's right. Republicans know this, but they won't say what he's saying because they want to keep their seats in Congress. But putting aside how this bill would exacerbate the healthcare crisis in this country, it also does so much more. In a rough breakdown from Jeff Stein of the Washington Post, he points out that it also cuts food stamps substantially. It cuts tax credits for renewable technology. We're talking wind, solar, EVs, and some senators apparently didn't even know that this was in there when they voted for it, according to NBC News. It also increases the military budget and funding for immigration enforcement. It gives significant tax cuts to rich people and corporations, obviously. And as Ari Drennan points out, thankfully, a provision banning trans healthcare was actually removed. So that's good. And as The Verge reports, the provision banning states from regulating AI for 10 years was also taken out of the bill. Now, it's entirely possible that the trans healthcare ban and moratorium on new AI regulations could make it back into the House version. But for now, they're out. So, I mean, I guess there's a little sliver of hope, or silver lining, I should say. But it begs the question, is there even a single good thing or even a neutral thing in this bill, or is it all terrible? The answer is there's some small good things in here, but the good is completely canceled out by all of the bad in this bill. So the net effect will be disastrous for most Americans. As the Washington Post explains, the bill increases the child tax credit, that's good, and adds a bonus to the standard deduction for seniors, a provision inspired by Trump's campaign pledge to stop taxing Social Security benefits. It would also create savings accounts for newborns seeded with $1,000 of taxpayer money, and it would allow buyers of American-made cars to deduct up to $10,000 in car loan interest. But beyond these populist flourishes, the measure is starkly regressive. The 10% of households with the lowest incomes would stand to be worse off by $1,600 on average because of benefits cuts, according to the Congressional Budget Office's analysis of the House version of the bill. The 10% of households with the highest incomes would be better off by $12,000 on average. In other words, this bill will make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And what's insulting is that $12,000 isn't even a lot to people who are well off, but $1,600 is devastating for people who are not well off. This is the single largest upward transfer of wealth in American history. And they are doing this in front of our eyes. And when you take into account the combined effects of this bill with Trump's tariffs, Yale's Budget Lab reports that the bottom 80% of Americans are going to see their incomes decrease, meaning the overwhelming majority of Americans will be worse off financially because of the Trump administration. So if you were one of the dipshits who voted for Donald Trump because you thought that the cost of eggs was too high, you fucked yourself and the rest of us over more than you'll ever know. And none of this is surprising, by the way. It's what Republicans always do. They take power and then they cut taxes for the rich at the expense of the poor. Even Trump's no tax on tips, which is included ostensibly to help working class people, could easily become another loophole for wealthy tax dodgers who can now classify their income as tips to avoid paying even more taxes. And no tax on tips might actually fuck over working people, ironically, more than it helps them, since a lot of people who subsist on tips don't even make enough money to pay federal taxes in the first place. So if their income increases, they may no longer qualify for the earned income tax credit, which means that they get less money each year when they file their tax returns. So if Trump really wanted to help people making tips, he would abolish the sub-minimum wage and increase the federal minimum wage, but he had no interest in doing that because the goal wasn't to help working class people, obviously. The goal was to help rich people at the expense of working class people. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but Republicans aren't even bothering to lie to us about how the wealth is one day going to trickle down, because quite frankly, they don't give a fuck if we support it or not. And I say this because the BBB is extremely unpopular, but in spite of its unpopularity, it passed the Senate anyway, and it's probably going to pass the House too. And to put it into perspective, just like how unpopular it is, I want to show you this clip from CNN's data analyst. And this aired a day before the bill passed, so they had all this information. Nonetheless, they voted for it anyway. But without further ado, here's Harry Anton.
The highest rating comes from the Washington Post at minus 19 points. How about Pew, minus 20 points? How about Fox, minus 21? Quinnipiac, minus 26. And KFF takes the cake at minus 29 points. When you have a bill whose net favorable rating ranges from minus 19 points, which is already terrible, all the way to minus 29 points, the bottom line is the American people don't see this as a big, beautiful bill. They see it as a big, bad bill. They hate it, hate it, hate it. They think it's awful, awful, awful.
Yeah. So Americans don't want this, clearly, but that doesn't matter. We're probably going to get it anyway because fuck you. The rich people want more money. Now, if we lived in a democracy, politicians would see these polls and think, oh, we can't support this because it's too unpopular and our constituents are going to punish us for it in the next election. But they know that the millionaires and billionaires that they're giving our money to are going to have their backs when that time comes. So the rich people that they just made richer are going to fund their campaigns, and the right-wing propaganda machine will kick into gear, and it's going to make us all forget about what they just did. They'll tell you that trans people and immigrants are doing crime and killing people and endangering your kids or whatever. They'll then screech about Democrats being communists or too woke, and they're hoping that all of that brainwashing will be enough to get you to forget about how they just shivved you. This is the GOP playbook in a nutshell. They're fundamentally evil and exist to ensure that you're as miserable as possible while the rich are as rich as possible. We're talking about an organization composed exclusively of sick, sadistic sociopaths who literally get off on people's pain and suffering. I actually believe that. And unless the House votes against this bill, odds are one of the most destructive, devastating bills in modern American history will become law, and it will kill people. And in this excellent segment about this bill, John Oliver, I think, put it best.
If it becomes law, we're going to be looking back on it decades from now, the same way we look back at all the destructive shit that Reagan did.
He's right. And I would highly encourage you to watch his entire segment because he talks about how the work requirement, which is how Republicans are selling this, is a little bit of a catch-22 because these work requirements are just additional obstacles that deny people who qualify the food stamps and healthcare that they deserve. So we have to do everything that we possibly can to stop this bill because our lives depend on it, literally. One death due to a lack of healthcare, that is too many. But 51,300 each year in the richest country on the planet, that is an unforgivable atrocity. That could be a friend, a family member. It could be you. They're trying to kill us, and we cannot let them. So call your representative and protest outside of their fucking offices if you have to, because our country may never recover from this if it passes.